This is just additional word problem practice and help for any of you who might be struggling with these. What I want you to do is go ahead and write the word problem down. Go through, do what we did where we kind of highlight it, we identify the variables. Try to go as far as you can into it each time. When you get really stuck and you can't figure anything out, that's when you want to go ahead and hit play and then walk through it with me again. And as you're walking through it with me, really look at where you're getting stuck, where you're having trouble, so that I know what I can do to help you in class continue to get better at these. So for number 1, a softball team played 149 games. The team won 8 more than 2 times the number of games they lost. How many games did they lose? So we know one of our variables right there is games lost. The other variable that you're going to need to look at is the number of games won, even though in the end they only want one part of the question answered. So that should have been your variables. I'm going to go ahead with W equals games won. I don't like using L because L ends up looking like other letters. So you just have to think of something maybe like S for lost. Games lost. Or you could have used T, but again, T sometimes looks like different things to people. O's aren't good because they look like zeros. So you really want to be careful with the variables you choose. Okay, so we know they played a total of 149 games. And if I know they played 149 games, I know that that is going to be their games that they won and their games that they lost. So my W, my won games, plus my lost games equals a total of 149 games. Doesn't say anything about tied games in there, so we're not going to worry about that. Here's your second equation. Your second equation is a little different in this one, but you are going to come across these a lot, so you have to be aware of them. The team won 8 more than 2 times that it lost. So its winnings are 8 more, so plus 8, than 2 times what it lost. And we did a lot of those in chapter 2, and we've kind of practiced them throughout, so hopefully you just saw that pretty quickly. Remember, team won 8 more than 2 times what it lost. Okay, so its winnings are twice what it lost plus the 8 more, if you want to look at it that way. Really nice thing about these types, you already have an isolated variable. There's your isolated variable. So this is the side you're going to circle, and you're going to plug it in for that variable in the other equation. Now we'll go through and we'll write our one equation with one variable. So instead of W, we have 2s plus 8 plus s equals 149. Nothing to distribute to, so I really didn't need my parentheses, but I'm practicing. Now I have like terms. 2s plus s is 3s plus 8 equals 149. Subtract 8. 3s equals 141. Divide both sides by 3. S equals 3 goes into 14 4 times, with 2 left over, and 3 goes into 21 7 times. Now, what you notice here, you found S. You found the games they lost. They want to know how many games they lost. You're already done. You don't have to go plug it in to find the winning games. If you wanted to, you could, but you don't need to because they only asked you how many they lost. Be really careful with these. Make sure you always answer the question they asked. Sometimes you'll end up getting something wrong just because you didn't answer the correct question. So then you write the team lost 47 games. And you're done. Here's the second one. Write this down. hit play when you're ready to go over it. If you want to try it on your own, just try it on your own before you hit play. Alright, so the first thing I'm doing is looking for my variables. I found them right away in my question. How many cars and vans will be needed? So I'm going to go ahead and use C for cars and V for vans. And you always need to be doing that so that we know what variables you're using. This one's a little tricky. You have to be careful because notice it talked about the van seats including the driver and the car including the driver. So what you want to actually do is you want to think about when you're talking about these members and then you're talking about including the driver. We know there's 5 chaperones, so we're just going to add 5 to our total. So 26 members plus 5 chaperones. So 26 youth plus 5 chaperones equals 31 people. Because we're talking about these numbers including the drivers, we need to include the people in our total. Now, we know we had 5 chaperones, so we know that our cars and our vans can't be more than 5. It's going to be 5. So 5 chaperones means vans and cars equals 5. So our first equation, vans plus cars equals 5. Second equation is based on how many people. That's where we have to talk about these 31 people. 31 people, 7 in a van and 5 in a car. So 7 for every van plus 5 for every car equals the 31 people total. Here's your 2 equations. This is the one that has 2 variables with a coefficient of 1. So go ahead and isolate one of those variables. And you end up with V equals 5 subtracting C. And that is what you're going to plug in for V. Rewrite your one equation, 7 times 5 subtracting C plus 5C equals 31. So I rewrote that equation, but I plugged that in for V. Distribute. 35 subtracting 7C plus 5C equals 31. Now you're going to go ahead and combine like terms. They're on the same side of the equation, so just combine them as they are. Negative 7C plus 5C. I have 35. Subtracting 2C equals 31. Those are combined. Now I'm going to isolate C. So I subtract 35 from both sides. Negative 2C equals a negative 4. And again, at this point, most of you should be getting to the point where you can do this in your head mentally, this last step. Divide both sides by negative 2. Negative divided by negative is a positive 2. Now, since I have 2 cars, if I go back up and look, C was cars. 2 cars, I knew I only had 5 chaperones, so I automatically know that means I have 3 vans. Plug it into the easier of the 2 equations, even though either one would work. And then you would answer, it says how many cars and vans, so they will need 2 cars and 3 vans. Remember in real life, if you were to end up with a fraction or a decimal here, you would always need to round up no matter what you got in this sense, because you would need the space no matter what if there was part of a person there. Copy this down, try it on your own, hit play when you're ready to go through it. Ice cream cones cost $1.10 and sundaes cost $2.35. One day the receipts for a total of 172 cones and sundaes were $294.20. How many cones were sold? So only one of our variables was listed in the question, but if you notice, the other variable is based on the other thing we're looking at, which is sundaes. So you could do C for cones. And again, some of you might not like using S because it looks like a 5. So you could even choose something like D for sundaes. So there's your two variables. Now you need to look for information about two different equations. First equation, I notice that there's a cost associated with cones and a cost associated with sundaes. Whenever I notice that, then I want to look for a total cost of cones and sundaes, and down here, the total cost was $294.20 for cones and sundaes that day. You always want to match up the money per something with the total cost when you set up those equations. So I can say I pay $1.10 for every cone plus $2.35 for every sundae, and that's going to end up equaling my total cost for the day, which was $294.20. Now I need to go look for other information. And as I'm looking, I notice that it talks about how many were sold. There were 172 total sold cones and sundaes. It has nothing to do with the cost, so I don't worry about the cost. I'm just worried about there were 172 cones and sundaes, which means my cones plus my sundaes equals 172. Hopefully you saw that. If you didn't, rewind, go through it again with me. Now I want to go ahead and isolate either C or D. I'm not going to try to isolate one of these because those don't look fun to isolate. The other thing I'm going to do in this one is I'm going to go ahead and do a decimal buster. I don't want to deal with decimal busters. So I'm going to rewrite this original equation here with a decimal buster, which is 110C plus 235D equals 29420. Everything moved over 2 places. I didn't have to add any zeros because everything was already 2 places over. Then I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this equation, and I'm going to actually go ahead and, because in the end we're just trying to find how many cones, I'm going to go ahead and move cones over, C, so that I can plug in cones and solve for cones the first time. It's going to save me time. If you didn't see that, it doesn't matter. Either one works. So I'm going to subtract C and subtract C. And then my new second equation is D equals 172 minus C. And that's going to go in for D. Now we're going to rewrite one equation with only C's. I end up with 110C plus 235, and then in parentheses, instead of a D, I'm plugging in 172 minus C equals 29,420. Don't forget to distribute there. When you go to distribute, you're going to have to multiply 235 times 172. And you end up with 40,420. So now I have 110C plus 40,420 subtracting 235C equals 29,420. Notice we're going to end up with a negative here, but that's okay because when we move that, we're also going to have a negative. So in the end, your answer should be positive. Combine these like terms. you get a negative 125C. Plus 40,420 equals 29,420. We subtract 40,420 from each side. We get negative 125C equals 11,000. Sorry, there. Okay, once we have this, we're going to subtract 40,420 from each side. Be careful here because you should have a negative answer. Negative 125C equals a negative 11,000. Divide both sides by negative 125, and you end up with a positive 88. Now you go read your question again. Your question said how many cones were sold. C is cones, so I already found my answer. I don't have to go plug it in here to find the other. If it asked for both, I would, but it didn't, so I'm done, and I say they sold 88 cones. And if they asked you how much money they made off of cones, you could plug it in and multiply it by $1.10, and you would find how much money they made off those 88 cones. So there's different things you can find depending on what your question is. This is the last example we're going to go over here. Copy this down, try it on your own, hit play when you're ready to go over it. You can also just hit play and get started whenever you get stuck, and then pause and continue on your own. So first we need to look for variables, and how much is each gallon of paint and how much is each brush. Those are our two variables. So you could do P for paint or G for gallon of paint and B for brush, however you want to do that. P equals a gallon of paint and B equals a brush is what I'm going to do. Now you want to look for your two sets of information. A little bit different this time. Notice here they're saying that you bought 8 gallons and 3 brushes for that total. It's not telling you how much a gallon is or how much a brush is. So it's a little bit different than the last problem we went through. What you're doing this time is you're saying, okay, well I know I had 8P and 3B that equaled that total. So there's your first equation. So 8 gallons of paint and 3 brushes had a total. So 8P plus 3B equals 152.50. And then when you go look at your other set of information, this time 6 gallons, 2 brushes for 113. When I go to look at this, not going to be easy to isolate either variable here, not going to be easy to isolate either variable here. So unfortunately, you're going to have a little bit of a decimal to work with when you go to isolate these. Or something to work with in here. What I do notice is that it seems easier to go ahead and divide 6 or 2 into 113. So I'm going to go ahead and try to isolate B, and that way I have less to deal with later. So we're going to isolate B. And when we go to isolate B, first thing we have to subtract 6P from both sides. 2B equals a negative 6P plus 113. Divide everything by 2. Now we have our new equation, which is B equals a negative 3P, because 2 goes into a negative 6 3 times, and then plus 2 goes into 11 5 times with 1 left over, 2 goes into 13 6 times with 1 left over, and so we're actually going to end up with a 0.5, or if you wanted to keep it as money, you could put 0.50. Which we'll just do this time in case. Now, if you want to go check it on your calculator the way I just did that mentally, because you don't want to make mistakes mentally. So even if you're practicing that way, just go ahead, divide 113 by 2 to make sure that you got the right answer so you don't worry later about making a mistake. This whole thing can be substituted in for B in the blue equation. So now I'm going to rewrite my equation. I have 8p plus 3, and instead of a b, I'm going to put negative 3p plus 56.50 equals 152.50. Little side note, if you're watching this after we learned elimination, this problem would have been much better to use elimination for. But because we're only using substitution when I'm posting this, I'm going to go ahead and show it just using substitution for now. If you wanted to try solving it using elimination, you should still end up with the same answer in the end. Now we need to distribute. We end up with 8p plus, oops, I should have put minus, so instead I'm just going to do minus 9p like that, plus a negative 9p. 5650 times 3 is 169.50, and it's a positive, equals 152.50. Combine my like terms here. I end up with a negative p plus 169.50 equals 152.50. And then I'm going to subtract 169 just to save space. I'm not going to show that step here. So I have 152.50 subtracting 169.50 and end up with a negative p equals a negative 17. Negative divided by negative is a positive. P equals 17. Now I need to go look, what did I find? P is a gallon of paint. So now I know every gallon of paint was $17. Plug that into this equation or this equation to find how much a brush is. I'm going to go ahead and plug it in blue right here to save some space so we keep it on one page. I'm going to plug it into the blue equation. So 8 times 17 plus 3b equals 152.50. Now that I wrote this here, some of you should be getting comfortable enough with your steps of solving equations. Even though on a test I still want you to show me the steps that you made in case you make an error, you really want to be getting more efficient at doing this. So right here I see 152.50, and I know I'm going to end up multiplying 8 times 17, and I end up with 136. So now I'm going to take 152.50 and I'm going to subtract 136 from it, and I have 1650. Divide that by 3 and I have 550. So brushes are 5.50, and now I have both my answers. A gallon of paint costs $17, and a brush costs $5.50. Again, if you had used elimination to solve this, you should still have that answer. If you had taken P and plugged it into this, you should still have that answer. Remember, either equation works.